So, but anyway, this is how Ishmael comes to a notion of the loom of time. Any comments from any of you about that? I find it remarkable in that so many people are saying, well, it's either all free will or it's all necessity. And he sees complexity here. He sees an interaction among all of these elements to make a really complex thought. Any response or comments or questions?
So the
go ahead, Marcel, and then go ahead.
Okay. So the mat spreads across the bottom of the boat, right? The inside.
This mat is something that they're going to put in their whaleboat. Yes.
And it's going to make it stronger and more accessible, I guess.
I'm not sure how they're going to use that, Matt. Maybe they'll use it to help carry things from the big boat to the small boat to just kind of place them on a mat and everybody takes a corner and carefully, gently moves it. Yeah. Or it may be something that they might be sitting on or putting it at their feet for some reason. Maybe it will be more comfortable somehow for the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any comments? Somebody else said something?
Yeah, I just find it.
Okay, who was it? Let's go, Michael, and then somebody else. Michael next.
This is Mike, yeah. Just found it interesting how he can take something as simple as weaving a mat and get into such philosophical and spiritual and full of ideas from that.
I think it's amazing too. Yes. And someone else had a comment?
Yeah, I did.
Daryl.
This is Daryl. I agree with that. It is odd how he will take the simple thing and make it into such a philosophical, theological item. But is the sword, it talks about the savage's sword, is that like the needle?
The sword is something like, it's a board that would go between these things and kind of shove down to make it either tight or loose. It's not a needle. The needle would be more like the spindle that carries the weft or the woof back and forth through the warp.
Okay.
It's the shuttle would be more like a needle.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Reading along in that chapter, right after there's this voice, and it was. It's such a startling thing. You've got this very peaceful and then the philosophical discussion about the loom of time, and then we get a change of pace. A high aloft in the cross trees was that mad gay-header Testigo. His body was reaching eagerly forward, his hand stretched out like a wand, and at brief sudden intervals he continued his cries. To be sure, the same sound was the very moment, perhaps being heard all over the seas, from hundreds of whalemen's lookouts perched out as high in the air, but from few of those lungs could that accustomed old cry have derived such marvelous cadences from Testigo the Indians. As he stood hovering over you, half suspended in air, so wildly and eagerly peering toward the horizon, you would have thought him some prophet, some seer beholding the shadows of fate. Here we get the connection of fate. We've talked about fate. It comes in right here, fate's the green one. So he's tying that mat somehow to this whole business of fate. And by those wild cries announcing their coming, there she blows, there she blows, where away on the lee beam, about 2 miles off, a school of them. Instantly all was commotion. After we get some of these long drawn out lines, and almost as long as the weaving of the line through the making the mat, we get all this commotion. We've seen what may be a whale, maybe a sperm whale, maybe Moby Dick. And so suddenly all is chaos. I like that. Just you have that buildup of just relaxation and then commotion. We talked a little bit last time about how Queequeg, during the first lowering, how he responds to that. And I want to read that chapter. It's the following chapter, and I'll read that too, because I think it's a real capsule, I think, of a lot of the action that we'll see in the rest of the book. How it is that when you lower, that is, you put your, it's called the first lowering. That's the first time they put the whale boats down in the water, so that the whaling boats generally have about 6 men in each one, a harpooner, one of the mates, and to help guide it. But the harpooner is the most important person on each one of those whale boats. But here we get an example of some of the chaos that is a part of the whole whaling venture. And I'll read that. This is chapter 48. Though not one of the oarsmen was then facing the life and death peril so close to them, had yet with their eyes on the intense countenance of the mate and the stern of the boat, they knew that the imminent instant had come. They heard too an enormous bellowing sound as of 50 elephants stirring in their litter. Meanwhile, the boat was still booming through the mist, the waves curling and hissing around us like the erected crests of enraged serpents. The imagery here of elephants and serpents, we get animals here, we get wildness. That's his hump. There, give it to him, whispered Starbuck. A short rushing sound leaped out of the boat. We're in Starbuck's boat because we've got Ishmael telling the story. He's narrating it. And of course, the harpooner is Queequeg. It was the darted iron of Queequeg. Then all one welded commotion came in. Then in one welded commotion came an invisible push from the stern. That's the back. While forward, the boat seemed striking on a ledge. The sail collapsed and exploded. A gush of scalding vapor shot up nearby. That's probably the whale, probably spouting. Something rolled and tumbled like an earthquake beneath us. There, the whale's probably right underneath them. The whole crew were half suffocated as they were tossed helter-skelter into the white curdling cream of the squall. Squall, whale, and harpoon had all blended together, and the whale, merely grazed by the iron, escaped. Though completely swamped, the boat was nearly unharmed. Swimming around it, we picked up the floating oars and lashed them across the gunwale, tumbled back into our places. There we sat to our knees in the sea, the water covering every rib and plank. So the whaleboat is taken on a great bit of water, so that to our downward gazing eyes, the suspended craft seemed like a coral boat grown up to us from the bottom of the ocean. The wind increased to a howl. The waves dashed their bucklers together. The whole squall roared, forked, and cracked around us like a white fire upon the prairie, in which unconsumed we were burning, immortal in those jaws of death. In vain we hailed the other boats. As well roar to the live coals down in the chimney of a flaming furnace, as hail as those boats in that storm. Meanwhile, the driving scud, rack, and mist grew darker in the shadows of night. No sign of the ship could be seen. The rising sea forbade all attempts to bail out the boat. The oars were useless as propellers, performing now the office of life preservers. So the oars they had wood in them, so they could keep them above water if they had to be up to their neck in water. So cutting the lashing of the waterproof match keg, after many failures, Starbuck contrived to ignite the lamp in the lantern. It's dark. The lantern will provide light. Maybe the ship can find them. Then stretching it on a waif pole, handed it to Queequeg as the standard bearer in his forlorn hope. There then he sat, holding up that imbecile candle in the light of that almighty forlornness. There then he sat, the sign and symbol of a man without faith, hopelessly holding up hope in the midst of despair. Wet, drenched through, and shivering cold, despairing of ship or boat, we lifted up our eyes as the dawn came on. The mist still spread over the sea, the empty lantern crushed in the bottom of the boat. Suddenly, Queequeg started to his feet, hollowing his hand to his ear. We all heard a faint croaking, as of ropes and yards hitherto muffled by the storm. The sound came nearer and nearer. The thick mists were dimly parted by a huge vague form. Affrighted, we all sprang into the sea as the ship at last loomed into view, bearing right down on us within a distance of not much more than its length. Floating on the waves, we saw the abandoned boat. As for one instant, it tossed and gaped beneath the ship's bows like a chip on the base of a cataract, and then the vast hull rolled over it, and it was seen no more till it came up, weltering astern in the back. Again, we swam for it, were dashed against it by the seas, and were at last taken up and safely landed on board. Ere the squall came close to, the other boats had cut loose from their fish and returned to the ship in good time. The ship had given us up, but was still cruising, if haply it might light upon some token of our perishing, an oar or a lance pole. A beautiful chapter. It captures, I think, the excitement of the hunt and the despair of being left behind. Any comments from any of you? I think one of you last time mentioned about how Queequeg is, sitting here in all the wetness and trying to hold up a candle.
Yeah, I had to, when I read it, I had to reread it to make sure that I understood that their boat had been given up for lost, that they actually got separated and spent, the night on the open ocean in the dark, and just happenstance that they happened to be found by the Pequot in the morning.
Right. It was so foggy and misty, and the waters there had been so much commotion with the attempt to capture a whale that failed. The whale got away, and they cut their ropes because of the they just they were so messed up and so disordered that they couldn't manage to catch the whale. They were just at wit's end.
Now,
and then if they had stayed with the boat, they imagined what could have happened, because they would have gone underneath. It seemed like underneath the ship, and the boat itself was. I don't know if they could, take pieces of it and reconstruct it, or if that whole boat got made useless. I don't know. Can any of you pick up whether they could still use that boat, that whaling boat, or is it just so crushed that they had to leave it behind and make another one, perhaps from scraps? I don't know. Maybe they.
It seems in subsequent outings after whales that they had sufficient boats for everybody to go out. So
maybe they had some backup equipment. They had a carpenter on board that they could perhaps refashion another boat. Maybe we don't get the details of this. We have to just surmise. But I think it's pretty clear that if they had not abandoned the boat, they likely would have been severely injured, because the big boat, it somehow got tossed. It says that the abandoned boat, for one instant, it tossed and gaped beneath the ship's bows like a chip at the base of a cataract. It would have been very dangerous for them to still be on that boat, the way it interacted with the main ship. Dangerous business. Glad I'm reading about it, not on the boat with them. Any other comments?
Was Ahab out? Did Ahab go out on this chase, or was he not one of the boats after this whale?
That's a good question. I kind of think that he wasn't part of this chase. He wants to be more sure that it's Moby Dick, and he'll get out once he realizes it's going to be Moby Dick. I think he gets out on the chase. I could be wrong, but my inclination is that if Ahab's boat had been out with them, we might have gotten some more information about what Ahab's response to this all was.
No, actually, I guess when I just looked back at the start of the chapter, and it says, Ahab, spread yourselves, cried Ahab, give all 4 boats. Thou flask, pull out more leeward. So they did send out all 4 boats.
Yeah, 4 boats. He must have been on one of those boats then, because he would have been the 4th boat, right?
Yeah, and he had his Oriental.
Yeah, right. The Parsi.
Yes.
Fadala. Yeah, Fadala. Yeah, was his harpooner. Yes. So he was out. And he all managed to get back on. Okay. Good finding here. We're going to jump ahead to the chapter called Brit. Chapter 58, in which we get a comparison of the sea and land. This is Ishmael talking or writing. just a mental observations here comparing the sea and the land. Wherein differ the sea and the land? That a miracle upon one is not a miracle upon the other. Preternatural terrors rested upon the Hebrews when under the feet of Korah and his company, the live ground opened and swallowed them up forever. This is in Numbers. Yet not a modern sun ever sets, but in precisely the same manner, the live sea swallows up ships and crews. But not only is the sea such a foe to man who is an alien to it, but it is also a fiend to its own offspring. Worse than the Persian host who murdered his own guests, sparing not the creatures which itself hath spawned. Like a savage tigress that tossing in the jungle overlays her own cubs, so the sea dashes even the mightiest whales against the rocks, and leaves them there side by side with the split wrecks of ships. No mercy, no power, but its own controls it. Panting and snorting like a mad battle steed that has lost its rider, the masterless ocean overruns the globe. Consider the subtleness of the sea, how its most dreaded creatures glide underwater, unapparent for the most part, and treacherously hidden beneath the loveliest tints of azure. Consider also the devilish brilliance and the beauty of many of the most remorseless tribes, as the dainty embellished shape of many species of sharks. Consider once more the universal cannibalism of the sea, all whose creatures prey upon each other, carrying on eternal war since the world began. Consider all this, and then turn to this green, gentle, and most docile earth. Consider them both, the sea and the land. And do you not find a strange analogy to something in yourself? For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all the horrors of the half-known life. God keep thee. Push not off from that isle. Thou canst never return. And so Ishmael writes this, but yet he has this desire at the beginning of Loomings that in order to keep himself from committing suicide, he needs to get on a whaling boat. He's a mixture of competing ideas and feelings, but here I think his sympathies are directly with the land. The land is peaceful according to him, and the sea is like a cannibal. Of course, land creatures eat one another too, but he doesn't focus on that. He makes a contrast here with the sea being more vicious by far than what the land is. I put in green all these consider, and it's an interesting little mini essay here of comparison, contrast. It's more contrast than comparison of the dangers of the sea versus the peacefulness of the land. Any comments about this before we proceed? Next passage to consider is the Jeroboam. We have in this book, let's see, I wrote it down in my table of contents. There are various, what they call gams, conversations between captains, perhaps, and maybe with other crew members of ships that they meet. And in this book, we have 8 different ships that they encounter, and we don't have time to go into the encounters and their exchanges and the stories told between various ships. There are 8 of them, and you can see in the table of contents that they're listed. The Pequod meets such and such, the Pequod meets such and such, and each one of them is named. We're going to spend some time with the Jeroboam, and later next time we'll mention their encounter with the Rachel. Those 2, I think, are more significant than the others. The significance of the name of Jeroboam. Anybody remember who Jeroboam was from the Old Testament?
Oh.
Okay, head nods. Okay,
Well,
Jeroboam. Go ahead. Who's speaking? Clay?
I'm guessing. Was
Daryl?
Was Jeroboam the after Solomon's went downhill, then it went to two tribes, basically?
You're close.
The tribe of Judah and the tribe
Right.
of Israel. And I think
Yeah.
Jeroboam was probably Israel, was he not?
Yes.
Yeah,
The story is this. Let me get it where I got it written down so I get it right. David ruled the kingdom of Israel, and he was followed by his son Solomon, and it was one kingdom. David's had a son whose name was David's son was Solomon, and Solomon's son was Rehoboam. And so we have David, Solomon, Rehoboam, a great the higher of dynasties, let's say, passed from one family to another. Grandfather, father, son. And so we have Rehoboam as the king, but then there was a man named Jeroboam. He was not of the lineage of David. He was from another family. He led a rebellion against Rehoboam, and he took 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel to form the northern kingdom of Israel. And so Rehoboam was left only with the southern kingdom, and they named that part of it Judah. And I think it's significant that you have a boat named after this renegade, disruptive of the kingdom, man named Jeroboam, because the boat itself contains within it a kind of mutiny. And we get a little bit of it directly as indirectly as Stubb mentions. Yeah, when we met the town hall, we heard a little bit about this story, and then we get a little bit more now when they actually encountered the boat called the Jeroboam. The Jeroboam had on it an unusual character, a character that called himself Gabriel, a name of an angel who was a messenger. And the man here, the man called Gabriel, had yellow hair. He was described as a scaramouche, and that means a cowardly buffoon, a stock character in some Renaissance Italian comedies. But anyway, this one character who came on board from, let's see where he came on board from. Yes, he had been originally nurtured among a crazy society of Shakers, and I think here is a little bit of perhaps a little satire that Melville's getting across. And this man had, among the Shakers, been considered a great prophet. In their cracked secret meetings, having several times descended from heaven by the way of a trapdoor. I mean, he's kind of making fun of some religious beliefs among Shakers, perhaps. Announcing the speedy opening of the seventh vial, reference, I think, to some parts of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. And he carried in his vest pocket, but which instead of containing gunpowder was supposed to be with laudanum, which was a narcotic. Anyway, a strange apostolic whim seized this fellow Gabriel, and he had left for Nantucket, and he joined a whaling voyage. He's on this whaling voyage, it appeared that he was becoming insane. He announced himself as the Archangel Gabriel at this point and commanded the captain to jump overboard. Well, that's clearly a sign of potential mutiny. Certainly, he demonstrates the behavior of a kind of Jeroboam-like man. He published his manifesto, whereby he set himself forth as the deliverer of the isles of the sea, the vicar general of all Oceanica, and some of the crew members were sort of fearful of him, and yet they seemed to respect him. He had an atmosphere of sacredness about him, and he refused to work except when he pleased. He's definitely not playing by the rules of the boat, let's say, where you have to follow the orders of your captain or your first mates and so on. And the captain, let's see, the incredulous captain would have been rid of him, but apprised that the individual's intention was to land him at the first convenient port. The Archangel, that is Gabriel, forthwith opened all his seals and vials, and devoting the ship at all hands to unconditional perdition. He said the ship's going to hell because the captain wants to get rid of me. I want to get rid of the captain. We have chaos and disorder on this boat. But the crew of the boat sided with Gabriel rather than the captain, and they wouldn't let anybody mistreat Gabriel. So it came to pass that Gabriel had complete freedom of the boat, of the ship. Consequence of all of it was this: the archangels cared little or nothing for the captain and the mates, and since the epidemic had broken out on the boat, carried higher hand than ever, declaring that the plague, as he called it, was at his sole command, nor should it be stayed but according to his good pleasure. So he had, in effect, brought the plague to the boat, and he's the one that can control when it goes away or how long it stands. The soldiers, mostly poor devils, cringed, and some of them fawned before him in obedience to his instructions, sometimes rendering him personal homage as if to a god. Some things may seem incredible, but ever wondrous they are true. He was a fanatic. He had measureless self-deception and measureless power of deceiving and bedeviling various people. In response to all of this, Ahab from his boat says, I'm not afraid of your epidemic. He says to the boat's captain, come on board. So he invited the captain of this boat, Captain Mayhew, over onto the Pequod. But then Gabriel came to his feet and said, think of the fevers, yellow and violet. Beware of this horrible plague, and kind of keeping them away. And the captain says, Gabriel, don't must either, and we don't get the rest of it. Then a big long wave came. The only thing that Ahab can get in is the word edgewise. Have you seen the white whale? That's it. That's all that Ahab is interested in at this point. And the Gabriel says back, think of thy whaleboat, stoven and sunk. Beware of this horrible tale. Beware of the horrible tale. So again, we have a kind of prophetic omen or portent saying beware, and you don't know whether you can trust this man Gabriel or not, and that's the extent of it. That was the communication there, just a way to make people, I guess, apprehensive. Any comments to this?
Well, it turns out that they had seen the white whale, correct?
Yes.
At the end of that chapter?
I think so, yes. Mm-hmm. When I read this thing, when they talked about plague and they talked about a leader that had usurped power and people saw him as a god, I could not help but think when I read this several months ago of what they call now the former guy. I'll leave it at that. Then we get the chapter about the fountain. And again, this one, it shows us the way of thinking, the way that Ishmael comes to know things. And the first part of that chapter is just all kinds of rambling back and forth. And he's got this big question about whether or not what comes from the fountain. The fountain is the hole in the top of the sperm whale from which the steam or water or whatever it is that comes out and goes up like a fountain. He wants to find out, is it water or is it steam? And he makes this big deal that he's got to know which one it is. And he spends about 2 whole pages going through, according to this, maybe it's that, and whatever. He goes back and forth and back and forth. And then he concludes toward the end here. We get the concluding paragraphs here. I have heard it said, and I do not much doubt it, that if the jet is fairly sprouted into your eyes, it will blind you. The wisest thing the investigator can do then, it seems to me, is to let this deadly spout alone. Well, he's just wrestled with the spout and told us about it for 2 whole pages. It seems like a lot. But he says, but still we can hypothesize. even if we cannot prove and establish. So he's trying to at least follow some sort of scientific method here. My hypothesis is this, that the spout is nothing but mist. And besides other reasons, to this conclusion, I'm impelled by considerations touching the great inherent indignity and sublimity of the sperm whale. I count him no common, shallow being, inasmuch as it is an undisputed fact that he is never found on soundings or near shores, as all other whales sometimes are. He is both ponderous and profound. Sperm whale is given a great deal of reverence in this novel. Devotes a lot of attention to whales in general, the cetology chapter, and then the sperm whale. And I'm convinced from the heads of all ponderous, profound beings such as Plato, Pyrrho, the devil, Jupiter, Dante, and so on, citing his authorities. Again, this is a kind of a medieval way of trying to get at knowledge. You study all the authorities and what do they say, and which authority is convincing or not. There always goes up a certain semi-visible steam, while in the end of thinking deep thoughts. For example, he's giving, when composing a little treatise on eternity, I had the curiosity to place a mirror before me, and ere long saw reflected there a curious, involved worming and undulation in the atmosphere over my head. The invariable moisture of my hair, while plunged in deep thought after 6 cups of hot tea in my thin shingled attic of an August noon, there seems an additional argument for the above supposition. So he's saying that what comes out of the spout is not water but mist, because he proved it by his own experience. And I think it's a spoof on science or scientific method, perhaps. I mean, so he's in a hot attic and he drinks a lot of tea and he suddenly sees steam's coming out of his head. That means that what comes out of a whale's spout is going to be steam rather than water. That, to me, it seems what he's arguing. It's the process. Reading further. And how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty misty monster to behold him solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor engendered by his incommunicable contemplations. It's like the whale is contemplating, just like he did in the attic. The whale is contemplating, and so that steam's coming out of his spout. And that vapor, as you will sometimes see it, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself had put its seal on his thoughts. For you see, rainbows do not visit the clear air, they only irradiate vapor. And so, through all the thick mists of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot, enkindling my fog with a heavenly ray. And for this I thank God. For all have doubts, many deny, but doubts or denials, few along with them have intuitions. Doubts of all things earthly and intuitions of some things heavenly. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. Again, process of thought. I like it. I enjoy it. I enjoy reading that. Any comments?
Well, I think that this follow-up on the fountain is, he had these whole series of short chapters about describing all the different aspects of, how they get the blubber off the whale.
Oh, right.
And,
the processes, the try-works and so on. Yes.
Yeah, and the comparison of the right whale head and the sperm whale head.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm reading this off my iPad, so I clicked into, the web browser to get a picture of the right whale and the sperm whale to actually visualize, his description, which was really quite interesting. So but yeah, he's he approaches it from as technical as he could be, but clearly he had what he had seen while he was whaling and then what he had studied after he got done whaling came together in his description.
Right. The research plus the experience, right? And a very full book. I mean, he packed so much into it. Then we get to the chapter called the Grand Armada. And the Grand Armada, it's an allusion, I think, to the Spanish Armada, a fleet of ships that were small and defeated the British in battles in the Renaissance, I think, against the British, because the Spanish had a lot of small boats that could get around fast, and the big bloated boats of the British couldn't vanquish the smaller armada of Spain. So we have a Grand Armada here, but it's not of boats, and this armada is made up of whales. And what I found interesting in this chapter was all of the references to circling and roundness and concentric circles. And it sort of foreshadows, I think, the very end of the novel itself, when the boat, the Pequod, goes down in a kind of rolling vortex, a maelstrom of water going round and round and round. Now, I like the use of that imagery in suggesting that circularity in this chapter. So, continuing to read, we glided between two whales into the innermost heart of the shoal, as if from some mountain torrent we had slid into a serene valley lake. Again, going from the turmoil into a kind of peaceful center here. Here the storms of the roaring glens between the outermost whales were heard but not felt. In this central expanse, the sea presented that smooth satin-like surface called a sleek. Notice the S sounds repeating here. Produced by the subtle moisture thrown off by the whale in his more quiet moods. Yes, we were now in that enchanted calm, which they say lurks at the heart of every commotion, calm in the middle of the sun and storm, like the eye of a hurricane. And still in the distracted distance, we beheld the tumults of the outer concentric circles and saw successive pods of whales, 8 or 10 in each, swiftly going round and round like multiplied spans of horses in a ring, and so closely, shoulder to shoulder, that a Titanic circus rider might easily have overarched the middle ones, and so have gone round on their backs. Owing to the density of the crowd of reposing whales more immediately surrounding the embayed axis of the herd, no possible chance of escape was at present afforded us. So they're in the middle of this calm and circled by a circling group of pod of whales. We must watch for a breach in the living wall that hemmed us in, the wall that had only admitted us in order to keep us up. So they're sort of imprisoned within this calm circle. Keeping at the center of the lake, we were occasionally visited by small tame cows and calves, that is, female whales and their babies, the women and children of this routed host. Now inclusive of the occasional wide intervals between the revolving outer circles and inclusive of the spaces between the various pods in any one of these circles, the entire area at this juncture, embraced by the whole multitude, must have contained at least 2 or 3 square miles. At any rate, though indeed such a test at any such time might be deceptive, spoutings might be discovered from our low boat that seemed played up almost from the rim of the horizon. I mention this circumstance because as if the cows and calves had been purposely locked up in this innermost fold. There's a way, I think, of the whales to protect the vulnerable. And as if the wide extent of the herd had hitherto prevented them from learning the precise cause of its stopping, or possibly being so young, unsophisticated, and everywhere innocent and inexperienced, however it might have been, these smaller whales, now and then visiting our calm boat from the margin of the lake, evinced a wondrous fearlessness and confidence. So we got small whales coming and approaching their boat in the middle of this calm, or else a still becharmed panic, which it was impossible not to marvel at. Like household dogs that came snuffling around us, right up to our gunwales and touching them, till it almost seemed that some spell had suddenly domesticated them. Queequeg petted their foreheads. Starbuck scratched their backs with his lance. But fearful of the consequences, for the time being, refrained from darting it. That is, he didn't try to poke him with the end of his lance. We get here an image of a peaceable kingdom where men and animals are at peace. It's a real calm. But far beneath this wondrous world upon the surface, another and still stranger world met our eyes as we gazed over the side. For suspended in those watery vaults floated the forms of the nursing mothers of the whales, and those that by their enormous girth seemed shortly to become mothers. Mothers, not cows. He's using human language here. The lake, as I have hinted, was to a considerable depth exceedingly transparent, and as human infants, when suckling, will commonly and fixedly gaze away from the breast, as if leading two different lives at the same time, and while yet drawing mortal nourishment, to be still spiritually feasting upon some unearthly reminiscence. Even so did the young of these whales seem looking up toward us, but not at us, as if we were but a bit of gulfweed in their newborn sight.
Mhm.
Floating on their sides, the mothers also seemed quietly eyeing us. One of these little infants that from certain queer tokens seemed hardly a day old might have measured some 14 feet in length and some 6 feet in girth. He was a little frisky, though as yet his body seemed scarcely yet recovered from that irksome position it had lately occupied in the maternal reticule. It's the word for purse, but it's the womb of the whale, where tail to head and all ready for its final spring, the unborn whale lies bent like a Tartar's bow, Hungarian or Mongol bow. The delicate side fins and the palms of its flukes still freshly retained the plated, crumpled appearance of a baby's ears newly arrived from foreign parts. Line, line, cried Queequeg, looking over the gunwale. Him fast, him fast. Who line him? Who struck? Two whale, one big, one little. What ails ye, man? Cried Starbuck. Looky here, said Queequeg, pointing down. As when the stricken whale from that tub has reeled out hundreds of fathoms of rope. After deep sounding, he floats up again and shows the slackling curl of line buoyantly rising and spiraling through the air. So now, we're getting an extended simile here. So now, Starbuck saw long coils of the umbilical cord of Madame Leviathan, by which the young cub seemed still tethered to its dam. Not seldom in the rapid vicissitudes of the chase, the natural line with the maternal end loose becomes entangled with the hempen one, that is the line attached to a harpoon, so that the cub is thereby trapped. Some of the subtlest secrets of the sea seemed divulged to us in this enchanted pond. We saw young Leviathan amours in the deep. And thus, though surrounded by circle upon circle of constellations and affrights, did these inscrutable creatures of the center freely and fearlessly indulge in all peaceful concernments, yea, serenely reveled in dalliance and delight. And even so, amid the tornado Atlantic of my being, do I myself still forever centrally disport in mute calm. And while ponderous planets of unwaning woe revolve around me, deep down and deep, deep inland, there I still bathe me in eternal mildness of joy. This reminds me of finding that bit of land, that Tahiti, surrounded by seas. Here we have, in the midst of this Grand Armada, a peaceful ocean experience where the females and their babies are protected, and it just so happens that the boat that Starbuck, the whale boat that Starbuck was leading, and had Queequeg and Ishmael in it, found themselves there and could somehow appreciate whale life from a different perspective than that of a hunter. Comments about this one, this chapter, responses, questions?
Why do you suppose Melville talks about or refers to the whales as Leviathan so often? It
comes right out of the Old Testament. The Old Testament refers, and you saw it in the extracts at the very beginning, that Leviathan is the name given to a whale. It means a great beast of some sort, and it's been associated with whales. There was in the 17th century, Thomas Hobbes wrote a treatise called The Leviathan, and it was I think it was about economics. and the Leviathan, and it was political science. The Leviathan in that book represented the escape of people from nature red in tooth and claw, everyone trying to get each other's stuff. They make an agreement that they're going to have a central strong leader that will protect them. And that's the Leviathan in Hobbes's political science. If we didn't have a strong leader, according to Hobbes, that would be everyone for himself, and we'd have a kind of jungle. And so people work toward a common good and decide that they really want to have a strong leader guide them, for better or for worse.
I do think that referring to whales as leviathans shifts it from a biological kind of viewpoint to a kind of a mythological grandeur.
Okay.
Something greater and more horrible than just a beast.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I think as Moby Dick goes on, that Melville is more and more interested in whales as a life form, as another intelligent species. And he's interested in their society. He's interested in everything about them. And a lot of, and I guess as time goes on, maybe I can refine that a little bit more in our little course here, but I think he's engaged in kind of a philosophical investigation of whale minds, and he's building a case that whales have minds too. Moby Dick is a malicious, malignant character, but in order to have that kind of psychology, if you will, he has to build that case, and there would be other whales who would not share in Moby Dick's malicious nature. But I do think he's kind of building a case for other minds, other species having intelligence, and in this complete other world that we don't see, and certainly back then was even less seen, this whole other world. And this chapter, I think, just fortifies that by talking about the mothers of whales, and instead of using, I mean, he uses anthropocentric terminology. And,
Right. Oh, yes. Right. The
so,
umbilical cord. Yeah.
I'll try to refine that as we go on, but I just can't help feel that he's really interested in whale psychology, so to speak, in a way.
I think he really respects whales. He loves the size of them, the grandeur of them. And I'm thinking maybe toward the end we get it more in the selection of what he decides when we get more into Ahab's psychology. I think that Ishmael, perhaps, and maybe Melville as well, begins to maybe take the side of the whales in this hunter-hunted kind of society here on the oceans. That maybe, sure, you need some whale oil, but do you need to go after whales in quite the vengeance that Ahab will soon be illustrating? That seems like a bit overweening, a bit too much. And I think maybe he takes the side of the whale, and of course the whale wins. If there's a tragedy, then the tragedy is Ahab's overweening pride, where he considers himself godlike, and whatever he wants is what's going to happen, and we see the result of that, and it's not a good result. And I think that's one of the main meanings of this book, I think, and I think that Melville and through Ishmael is building up toward that by giving us in this chapter especially a kind of sympathy for the family life of whales, and why are human beings out there causing this kind of peaceful existence to become one of warfare.
Yeah, I think that, I sense where he maybe is considering it unfortunate that the whale is only considered as a monetary source for the shipping companies in terms of bringing back the oil.
Right,
Uh,
right.
I think that it's like he's questioning, is it really worth it, given what we're doing to the whale, to just get the oil and be done with it?
Right, right. I think you could consider perhaps Melville as a 19th century. He's concerned about ecology, about the balances of nature, and about excessive hunting and what that can do to change the web of life.
Yeah, there's the example of the whale that had become entangled in the harpoon line. And
Yes.
it really has kind of a tragic sense to it.
Right. And not only do whales get entangled in harpoon lines,
Yeah.
later on we find out that others do as well.
Right.
And people get caught in their own weaponry.
As for size, can you compare the size of whales in Moby Dick's days with contemporary whales?
Oh, I think so. I think that the size of whales hasn't changed that much over eons. I think there's more difference between various types of whales than there is among one particular whale over time. I'll try to maybe next time I'll try to get some pictures of the right whale, the various other kinds of whales versus the sperm whale, so you can see some of the contrast. The sperm whale definitely has a huge head, a very powerful head, and I'll try to get some pictures of that.
The size of a school bus, or
Likely. Yep, I'll try to get some figures
bigger.
about size too.
Several
Okay.
school buses.
Right.
all right.
You see in some ways the foolishness of the whalers are really out overpowered, and that they even succeed in getting a few whales is somewhat a wonder. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Any other comments so far about what we've read for today? And then we'll go to another reading. We're going to look at Pip now, the castaway, and this is a story about a relationship between Stubb and Pip. Stubb, well, let's read it and then we can talk about it.
What chapter are you on now?
We're on chapter 93 now. It's called The Castaway, and I've got the text for it for us to read. Here we have.
Okay, way back here.
And the question to think about as we hear this being read now, is Ishmael playing on racial stereotypes in his description of Pip? Is he see Pip as an individual human being, or is he just seeing him as a little black boy? Well, we'll talk about that later. I'll read this and we can talk later about the description of Pip and how that plays in the story. But if there happened to be an unduly slender, clumsy, or timorous white or man in the ship, that man or white is certainly to be made a ship keeper. That's someone you stay on the ship. If you get somebody who's weak or maybe immature, you don't put that person in a whaleboat chasing the whale. You keep that one on ship. So it was in the Pequod with the little Negro Pippin by the nickname of Pip, by abbreviation. Poor Pip. You have heard of him before. You must remember his tambourine on that dramatic midnight, so gloomy, jolly, dramatic midnight. We for the first session, the second, just last time we when they were having this thing that I said, a row, it was a row, and there was some bullying going on, and Pip gets apprehensive and begins to go on a rant of his own. Pip, though ever tender-hearted, was at bottom very bright, with that pleasant, genial, jolly brightness peculiar to his tribe, a tribe which ever enjoy all holidays and festivities with finer, freer relish than any other race. For blacks, the year's calendar should show naught but 365 4th of Julys and New Year's days, nor smile snow, while I write that this little black was brilliant, for even blackness has its brilliancy, beyond yon lustrous ebony paneled in king's cabinets. In his native Tolan County in Connecticut, Pip had once enlivened many a fiddler's frolic on the green, and at melodious eventide with his gay ha-ha, had turned the round horizon into one star-belled tambourine. Maybe star-bellied tambourine, I don't know. The first time Stubb lowered with him, Pip evidenced much nervousness, but happily for that time escaped close contact with the whale, and therefore came off not altogether discreditably. Though Stubb, observing him, took care afterwards to exhort him to cherish his courageousness to the utmost, for he often would find it needful. That is, try to buck up and be courageous if you can. Now upon the second lowering, the boat paddled upon the whale, and as the fish received the darted iron, it gave its customary rap, which happened in this instance to be right under poor Pip's seat. The involuntary consternation of the moment caused him to leap, paddle in hand, out of the boat, and in such a way that part of the slack whale line coming against his chest, he breasted it overboard with him so that as to become entangled in it when at last plunging into the water. Again, the example of that line just taking the people out of the boat. That instant, the stricken whale started on a fierce run. The line swiftly straightened, and presto, poor Pip came off foaming up to the chocks of the boat, remorselessly dragged there by the line, which had taken several turns around his chest and neck, could have strangled him. Tashtigo, and he's the Native American, the harpooner for Stubb. Tashtigo stood in the bows. He was full of the fire of the hunt. He hated Pip for poltroon as a coward. Snatching the boat knife from its sheath, he suspended its sharp edge over the line and turning towards Stubb, exclaimed interrogatively, "Cut!" Meanwhile, Pip's blue choked face plainly looked, "Do for God's sake!" All passed in a flash. In less than a half a minute, the entire thing happened. "Damn him, cut!" roared Stubb, so that the whale was lost and Pip was saved. So as soon as he recovered himself, the poor little Negro was assailed by yells and execrations from the crew, tranquilly permitting these irregular cursings to evaporate. Stubb then, in a plain, businesslike, but still half-humorous manner, cursed Pip officially, and that done, unofficially gave him much wholesome advice. The substance was, never jump from a boat. Moreover, as if perceiving at last that he should give undiluted conscientious advice to Pip, he would be leaving him too wide a margin to jump in for the future. Stubb suddenly dropped all advice and concluded with a peremptory command: "Stick to the boat, Pip, or by the Lord, I won't pick you up if you jump. Mind that. We can't afford to lose whales by the likes of you. A whale would sell for 30 times what you would, Pip, in Alabama. Bear that in mind and don't jump any more." Hereby perhaps Stubb indirectly hinted that though man loved his fellow, yet man is a money-making animal, which propensity too often interferes with his benevolence. But we are all in the hands of the gods, and Pip jumped again. It was under very similar circumstances to the first performance, but this time he did not breast out the line, and hence, when the whale started to run, Pip was left behind on the sea, like a hurried traveler's trunk. Alas, Stubb was but too true to his word. It was a beautiful, bounteous blue day, and the spangled sea calm and cool and flatly stretching away all round to the horizon. But had Stubb really abandoned the poor little Negro to his fate? No, he did not mean to, at least, because there were 2 boats in his wake, that's behind him, and he supposed, no doubt, that they would, of course, come to pick up Pip very quickly and pick him up. Stubb's boat was by now far away, and he, with all his crew, so intent upon the fish that Pip's ringed horizon began to expand around him miserably. By the merest chance, the ship itself at last rescued him, but from that hour, the little Negro went about the deck an idiot. Such, at least, they said he was. the sea had jeeringly kept his finite body up, but drowned the infinite of his soul. Not drowned entirely, though, rather carried down alive to wondrous depths where strange shapes of unworked primal world glided to and fro between it before his passive eyes, and the miser merman, wisdom, revealed his hoarded heaps, and among the joyous, heartless, ever-juvenile eternities, Pip saw the multitudinous, God omnipresent coral insects that out of the firmament of the waters heaved the colossal orbs. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom, a weaving image here, and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. So man's insanity is heaven's sense, and wandering from all mortal reason, man comes at last to the celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic, and weal or woe feels then uncompromised, indifferent as his God. For the rest, blame not Stubb too hardly. The thing is common in the fishery, and in the sequel of the narrative, it will be seen what like abandonment befell myself. That would be Ishmael in the very last epilogue chapter. So, what do we make of Pip here? I think there's a whole tradition in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance of the wise fool, that kings often kept people like Pip around to give them guidance, and sometimes the guidance was excellent, and sometimes it was simply foolishness, and sometimes people played the fool in order to convey some wisdom that they might not otherwise be able to get across. Any comments about the attitude? Let's start with the attitude of Ishmael toward Pip. From what we get here, this is all Ishmael's perception. Is he describing Pip in a kind of patronizing way, or is he respectful of Pip? How do we characterize this? Especially the lines that I've got highlighted in yellow here in this area toward the beginning, what I read. What can you gather from that?
Well, I mean, he does comment, that he was brilliant and, beyond being black, he was a brilliant young man.
Yes, brilliant comes up, right? So he's seeing him as an individual in this respect, I would imagine, rather than a stereotype of blackness. Pip grew up he's a native of Tolan County in Connecticut. So he's not from the South, apparently. Maybe his parents were freed blacks, and maybe he was also come from a family that had been freed. This was before 1850, when slavery was still very much in evidence, both in the North and South to some extent. But some of the blacks were able to buy their freedom, or somebody bought it for them and they could be free. And Pip, maybe with some freedom, decided that he would like to try being on a whaling ship and offered his services. And that's how he came on board. But the thing that drew me, I think, in this paragraph that is in yellow here, he's very bright and pleasant. It's almost that genial, jolly brightness peculiar to his tribe. I think he's making some generalizations here. You can almost picture the caricature of the smiling. Everybody's I'm happy all the time. The big smile, big bright teeth. Picture sometimes that is used to caricature black people back in the past. Whoever enjoy holidays and festivities, it's sort of playing like that they rather have fun time together, and they're not hard workers, and also that they want every day is a holiday or with festivities, especially the holidays of 4th of July and New Year's days. And I see that the 365 4th of Julys in the context of something that I read recently, written by a speech by Frederick Douglass, a black man, and he wrote a speech and he delivered it in 1852. And the title of the speech is "What to a Slave is the 4th of July." It's not Independence Day for everybody in the United States. And so I do see that he's playing, I think, on conventional notions of Black people here in this paragraph. But I think he also does see him as an individual, and he does see some brilliance. And I think he is sympathetic to the plight of Pip. I think that he, unlike Stubb, who might have preferred to get the whale and let Pip just not make it, rather than save Pip and let the whale go by. I think Stubb's interest is in whaling, and I think that Ishmael here is showing sympathy toward Pip. And later on, we'll see a startling thing, to me at least, that Ahab later on takes Pip into the cabin to be with him. And the two of them have a relationship that is almost as if they're equals. And to me, that's the one redeeming quality I see in Ahab, because there aren't too many others that I know. But it was amazing that he sort of took to Pip at some point, took sympathy and took him in to be with him in the cabin to make sure that he would be safer.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Could it also,
Michael, go ahead.
Okay, in looking at this, it says, well, what if it would have been one of the other oarsmen that had been dunked in the water instead of Pip? Would, Stubb have been more inclined, instead of, say, cut in a questioning manner, would he say, cut and save him? Because in the previous chapter, if you recall, where Stubb had belittled the cook for not cooking his whale steak well enough. It seemed like
he was really disrespectful to the cook. Oh yes.
Yeah, and so is that the way he treats Black people in general? And so it's like, so you could look at this in the context of, well, what if it would have been an Anglo oarsman that had gone in? It would have been not a questioning cut the rope, but a commanding cut the rope.
Good point. That's right. I'm not sure. Later on, and let me see if I can find my notes about this. It's in our readings for next week. And I'm not sure what chapter it is offhand, but it so happens that a person that is at the masthead suddenly lets go, and he drops in the water and he disappears, and they throw in a life buoy, and the life buoy leaks and it drops down with him, and he's not rescued, and they don't pick him up. And that person is not named. I tried to figure out who was this, and the person's not named, but they do have another one that falls off the mast, and they don't stick around to get him. And they tried with the life buoy, but they had a defective life buoy, and he never made it. So that does happen. And we don't even get the person's name. Here, at least we know Pip. He has a name, and he has interactions with Testigo and with Stubb, and I think Ishmael gives him some respect, although he describes him in what I consider to be kind of stereotypical terms at the beginning. Any other comments from any of you about this episode?
yeah, just another comment here, another thought regarding Pip. Pip was identified as very bright, had a very positive demeanor, but he spends all this time in the ocean by himself, and it seems to drive him mad, if you will. It seems to drive him, well, I think he called him an idiot.
Right, it's the feeling of abandonment. That's what tipped him over the edge, that feeling like he was never going to get back on the ship again, and it literally unhinged his mind.
It did. It almost kind of made him mad, but also such as, you mentioned Ahab also took him in. Well,
Yes.
It seems to me that Ahab, who also was somewhat mad,
Yes.
had a
Well,
Maybe he saw a kindred spirit.
they had something in common.
Yes, yes.
So it's amazing how Melville weeds this together here. if you will.
Yes, yes.
He reserves, I think, some of the most sublime language in the whole book for that one paragraph where he describes how he's carried down to wondrous steps. And
Yes.
it's really an amazing passage of, you know, religious, spiritual.
Right, just think,
it's just
yeah,
sublime.
right. This paragraph that I've got right here toward the end of that chapter, right? Yes. Yes. And the miser merman wisdom revealed his hoarded heaps among the joyous, heartless, ever-juvenile eternities. He saw the multitudinous God all present in the coral insects, probably some creature that resembled an insect that was around the coral. And he sees this vision. I mean, he's maybe it's a kind of delusion he's in because he's so upset because he's abandoned. But yeah, the language here is just, it's wonderful. That's all I can say. It's wonderful language, beyond Shakespeare in a lot of ways. And this is the point where we're going to save it for next time, session 4. And I sent you the list of questions to think about for today and for session 4. So we're at a good stopping place here. I think we caught up from some of the times that we were a little lagging, but we're right on schedule at this point. So other comments you want to bring up before we say goodbye for the week?
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can get back to the full screen here. But yes, now I've got my full screen again. And we did not have today with us Jean Nyheis, but I see that the record button is on, so she will be able to see the recording of this if she wants to later on. Thank you. I did a lot of reading in this, but I think to get Melville, you got to get some text. And because we're a small group, we don't all have things to say. And so I think this is probably the best way to encounter it for the size group we are. And I do appreciate your comments and questions and discussion. Look forward to more next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Judy.
you.
Thank you, Judy.
Bye
Have a
now.
good
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Judy.
You're welcome.